lead member for schools, employment and skills at London Borough of Brent, to set the scene from a local authority perspective. Then we're going to hear from Jessica Lobo of the UN Global Compact Network UK, who's going to put climate action in the context of the wider UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, talk a little bit about the Race to Zero campaign, as well as COP26. We'll then be hearing from a local business, Shilpa Bilimoria, House of Bilimoria, who'll give us a flavour of how they've developed a sustainable business model for their operations. Then we'll hear from my colleague Barney Close at West London Business, who's going to introduce our sort of programme of action and the tools that we're making available through Race to Zero West London. And then Barney will hand over to Martina from Climax Community, who will introduce their Climate Essentials carbon calculation tool, which is, I think, really for most businesses, the place to get started with a baseline assessment of your carbon footprint. And then we're going to open up at the end for any questions that you may have. It may be that we open up for questions to Councillor Thomas Stevens straight after his contribution, just in case he has to slip away. So if you've got questions for the councillor, do put those in the chat window shortly. But without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce you, Councillor Thomas Stevens, as I said, lead member for schools, employment and skills, to share a bit more on Brent Council's perspective.
Thank you, Andrew. It's so a huge welcome to all of you, first and foremost, and it's a great pleasure to be here. As Andrew said, I'm the lead member for schools, employment and skills, and one of the great things about that is I see of the business side of this and the business case for investing in environment and improving the climate emergency, but also I think that the huge moral case for that, and I think it's essential that we all rise up to the challenge of the climate emergency. And I think what's so good about this event is to see such a diverse group of people here from a whole cross section of business and local government as well, and of course people at the West London level, to talk about how we can kind of go through this and move forward together. One of the most important things from my perspective is having a climate emergency led recovery that's really focused on the sector and the green economy and the carbon circular economy. Because I hold the jobs brief, that's quite an important, quite a critical issue for me personally, is how we ensure that that sector, that we get all the jobs we possibly can going to Brent. There are just kind of two things I wanted to emphasise briefly, I think, in my opening remarks. And first of all, that's just a bit about what Brent's doing and how we're kind of leading by example as a borough. Because it's only by leading by example that we can kind of spread good practice elsewhere and show and convince businesses that we mean a business. But secondly, I want to just talk a bit about how we're working with businesses in Brent as well to offer a solution. So to just go on to the first issue, in July 2019, Brent Council declared a climate and ecological emergency at our full council meeting, and we committed to doing everything in our power to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Despite the uncertainty of the past year, we all know one thing, and that is that climate change is coming, and it's coming fast. Following on from that, we put forward a climate and ecological emergency strategy, which was approved by Cabinet in April last year. And it's the culmination of a whole year of research, review, and engagement with our communities and our colleagues. And thank you to everyone who's worked on that. And it sets out our priorities and a pathway to carbon zero. Now, since 2010, we've succeeded in cutting our emissions by 63.7%. That exceeds the government targets. A full 39% of that actually comes from our actual reductions in energy use due to direct steps that we've taken as a council. For example, we've switched to LED street lights across the borough and in the public realm, but we've also moved into a brand new civic centre, which was named the greenest public sector building in 2014. We continue to say it's the greenest public building in Europe. I don't think that's true anymore, but we'll just keep saying it until someone corrects us, I think, because that's certainly what I tell everyone whenever I show people over. Our next target is to just ensure that we're leading by example and that we develop a plan to achieve carbon neutrality across our estate and our operations by 2030. We've already secured £3.2 million of funding to improve the energy efficiency of 16 council-owned buildings across our estate in just this year, for example, and we want to go further. In fact, I'm very pleased to say, given that I hold the schools brief, that we're also working on a programme to improve energy efficiency in our schools, which not only will reduce their carbon emissions and their impact on the environment, but will actually save them revenue costs as well during what is quite a tricky and difficult year for them financially. So looking past the council's own direct emissions, our strategy has, our climate and ecological emergency strategy has kind of 5 key themes which take into account the need to achieve this neutrality. And there's a focus on consumption, on resources and waste, on transport, on homes, buildings and the built environment, and on nature and green space, and then finally on supporting communities. And those are the kind of 5 key themes. As part of that, amongst other things this year, we're planning to, first of all, offer food waste caddies to every communal flat of over 8 people in Brent. We're working with United Colleges to provide new apprenticeship and training opportunities into the green economy. And like I said before, that's a really key focus of mine, is ensuring that the jobs of the future are Brent jobs and for Brent residents. We're installing 390 new electrical vehicle charging points. We've implemented 50 new bike hangers, and we're moving forward on that. We've kicked off a healthy neighbourhood scheme across various parts of the borough, and we've secured dozens of school streets as well in schools up and down the borough, which have been very well received by residents, and we're looking to make permanent now with support and funding from Transport for London. We're doing retrofit pilots of our own housing stock, and we're delivering retrofit work for low income and fuel poor households through funding received from the Green Homes Grant. And we're also launching our own carbon offset fund, working very closely with the community to allocate some of this funding as well. And we're continuing to educate and engage people through a new Brent environmental network, which has over 400 members. And we strongly encourage you all to join the environmental network, and that we can share details later. One of the things we really want to stress as well is the importance of reducing scope 3 emissions and greening our supply chain. So that's why we've just introduced a new procurement strategy, which means that as part of any procurement exercise in Brent, businesses have got to demonstrate how they're actually achieving and tackling the climate emergency with us and bidding their contracts. So we're mobilising £400 million of our own spending power in order to put the environment at the absolute core of what we do. I just want to move on now to what businesses we're doing and how we're working with businesses on that, because we can't lose sight of the fact that we all need to collectively act on these issues and address these concerns. So we already have over 900 businesses in the borough which are involved in some way in the low carbon circular economy. And we absolutely are striving to build on this. And one of the critical issues we have in Brent is that people's experience of the labour market is not always a good one. Job quality is often quite low. They're often in much lower wage jobs. They have, the cost of living in Brent is like a central London borough, but actually, the money that comes into their pocket is more like an outer London borough. And the green economy is a key growth sector for us, a key source of good quality, high paid jobs, and is something we're really, really working to get our residents into and support people to get into work. So it's absolutely central to our economic recovery as well as our environmental recovery. Now, reaching carbon zero, we appreciate, can be challenging for businesses, and whether that's due to a lack of time and resources or whether it's due to a lack of guidance or in-house expertise. So that's why one of the core objectives for us within our strategy is built around supporting the transition to a low carbon and circular economy model. And that means supporting our businesses to go green, and it means reducing the carbon footprint through all of our operations. So earlier this year, we were very pleased to collaborate with West London Business to host a series of webinars supporting businesses to go green, to survive and thrive. And that provided advice on sustainability across 5 different sectors. And we have a YouTube series with a series of webinars on that. We're also in the process of developing a toolkit for each of our 5 key business sectors in Brent, which will give information, tips and signposting for how we can lower the carbon emissions and become a greener borough, and work together on that. So there's one final message I would leave to just bring all this together, but I'm very keen to take questions, is please do get involved. And I'm going to make a shameless plug and say, please do get involved and sign up to the Brent Environmental Network. if you are based in Brent, we'd really encourage you to get engaged. We've had hundreds of businesses and organisations already signed up to it. And I think we can go further and work together on this to really make sure that we have a green-led recovery for Brent and for London as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Lots of ground covered there, and your personal passion really sort of came through for the challenges ahead, and the leadership role that the authority is clearly now adopting. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat window for any questions, and indeed don't forget that you can use the raise hand button underneath the participants list on Zoom, but as always, I have a few questions up my sleeve for you, Councillor, whilst just hopefully to warm up our fellow sort of delegates, and I'm also hoping that someone might drop into the chat window a link for where folk can register for the Brent Environment Network that you mentioned. I know we've got Maddie Rose there on cue. It's landed in the chat window now. My first question, Councillor, is, you've talked about the sort of green circular sort of economy companies, of which there are many hundreds already in the borough, and clearly you want more of those I suppose environment first sort of businesses. But when you're out and about as a sort of councillor, meeting perhaps more mainstream businesses, I don't know, local barbers or restaurants or builders, what's your sense of where they're at on the climate change conversation, and the sort of support and advice that they might be after to help them along the way?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. I think that our sense locally, I think, is that because of the pandemic, there's a real need for businesses to transform and to rethink how they work. And I think businesses are aware of that, and they're aware of certainly the digital gap, and this comes into it as well, because you're often having big firms out there that are competing very well, very effectively with residents. They want to enable themselves to transform digitally and to become much more involved, much more local, much more engaged with local residents in that way. And I think they are really keen and really aware of the need to transform and to work on this. What they need is support, and they need guidance. And I think one of the key challenges we have in Brent, we're massively overrepresented by micro businesses. So far higher proportion of micro businesses in Brent than there are certainly in central London and across loads of London boroughs. So I think that means that as a council, we have to try especially hard to equip them for the digital economy and to equip them for the green economy. And what I can say is that we're committing, in addition to the funding that's already been committed to the government, from the government in business support, we're committing ourselves an extra 2.5 million, which will go to some other businesses which have fallen through the cracks during the COVID pandemic. That will help them kickstart and go forward on that. We're doing a huge amount as well in terms of business advice, business support, engaging with a lot of the community centres and all that need that retrofitting and that greening. So I think that's really important, and I would just stress that, yeah.
And as you say, with thousands of micro businesses, it's a lot of doors to knock on, because folk aren't necessarily picking up emails and reading emails. We've got to use a whole lot of different ways to engage them. I'm keeping an eye on the chat window in case anyone else has questions they want to put to you. But I wonder whether we could move on to, I suppose, the challenge of how we get around West London. And of course, there are an awful lot of employees having to get from home to work in a borough like Brent. I think it's generally accepted now that certainly the science shows that to reduce our carbon footprint, there's going to have to be an awful lot more walking, cycling, use of public transport. But it would seem that the introduction of low traffic neighbourhoods has been a fairly contentious transition over the past year. And I just wonder what sort of lessons you take away from the sort of divergent views on how we change the use of road space to make it safer for lower carbon methods of getting about.
Yeah, so I mean, our focus on the environment was kind of two-pronged actually in Brent, because we had we worked on a number of healthy neighbourhood schemes across the borough. We're still reviewing the evidence on those actually and seeing where they come. Actually, I think of the ones we've committed, there's actually I think a willingness to work with that in the community. I actually get residents, and I'm not just saying this, proactively raise, whether or not a side road could be closed off for them if they, on their street. Actually, it's a really key local concern. The issue is how we engage with residents and make sure that it's their idea almost, and then work around that and get that going. But I'd also say though is school streets is a really key part of this as well. How people get out and about in the school run. What we're finding is residents are very willing to engage on that, very, very keen. The key question we get in our inbox now isn't why have you got a school street at my school? It's why can't my school have a school street? And when you're having that conversation, I think that's a bit of a better place to be, I think, on those things, and it moves us forward a bit more effectively. I think that the key issue is engagement. I mean, in my experience working with residents, they want to do their bit for the environment. They just want to be engaged correctly and in the right way. And I think that's the key message that we've taken forward, and that's what we're working on. And we'll definitely use that to inform the current low traffic neighbourhoods that we have as well.
Fantastic. So an encouraging shift in that conversation and attitudes, perhaps starting to take place in Brent. A final sort of question for you before we sort of pass on to Jessica, and that is that I think as we're going to unpack sort of later in today's webinar, we've obviously got tools that enable businesses to get stuck into tackling scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, heating, electricity, starting to look at some of the impacts of a business's supply chain. But we're also kind of very conscious that you can do all of these things that are within your control as a business owner and operator, and then you can still get stuck in trying to get down to zero emissions because you're ultimately still dependent on infrastructure like the transport system that we just talked about, but also, I know, for example, heating networks that aren't very efficient. The rollout of district heating is still pretty patchy. In a London context. So I suppose my question is, if you're a local business and you discover some of these barriers and missing bits of infrastructure, should you then get in touch with the council to have a conversation about how those problems might be tackled?
Definitely. Absolutely, yeah, and I think that and one of the kind of drivers of creating a Brent environmental network is exactly that. It's bringing in businesses and individuals and the community to kind of offer those solutions and explain in very practical terms. Right, this is an issue in my area. What are you going to do about it? Funding for us is a challenge as well, and I'm not going to promise anything that we can't deliver, but there are funding opportunities out there. And we do work with a lot of firms, a lot of community organisations. Let's say they've got really high heating costs, really high energy costs right now. Probably not in this weather, but let's say they do in future. How do they reduce that, and how do we work with them to do that? We have every 6 months or so we've got a neighbourhood community infrastructure levy round, for example, capital projects that people want in their local area to improve their environment. We can put them through that as well. Really, the barriers there are imagination, and so if people have that issue or that concern, definitely raise that with us. Go through the Brent Environmental Network and make sure that's addressed that way.
Fantastic, thank you. Very, very, very clear message from you there, Councillor. Well, without further ado, we are going to turn for the big picture to Jessica Lobo from the UN Global Compact Network, who's going to, as I said at the start, put in context for us this climate action with the sort of wraparound of the wider UN Sustainable Development Goals, a little bit about Race to Zero, as well as COP26. Over to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And thank you for the introduction. As you said, I work at the UN Global Compact Network UK, and my role really is to support businesses to drive sustainability and create the world we want. So really delighted to join you today to talk about this agenda. So a little bit about us. We are the UN Global Compact, which is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. So we have over 13,000 companies all over the world who have made the commitment to our 10 principles to support sustainability. And these universal principles are derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labour, environment, and anti-corruption. So I work in the UK network, and our role is to support all of our UK-based Global Compact members, really to operationalise those 10 principles, to report annually on their progress, and to support the wider UN development agenda. And at the moment, that wider UN development agenda is best represented by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So what are they? Next slide, please. the Sustainable Development Goals, or you may hear them referred to as the SDGs or the Global Goals, were passed in 2015. And they outlined 17 goals, these 17 goals on the screen, for the world to achieve by 2030. So you can think of it really as the world's to-do list. The goals themselves are really closely interlinked, but together they will bring about the future we want. So fighting inequalities, tackling climate change, and creating a better world. And you can see that the goals there really stretch to all different areas of society. So you've got things around the environment, like protecting life below water or taking climate action, more social things like gender equality or no poverty, perhaps a little bit more that's looking at the economy. So we've got decent work in economic growth, or maybe actually the way that our cities and our communities are constructed. And beneath these 17 goals sit 169 targets and 232 indicators so that we can measure our progress against this 2030 agenda. And this agenda really was agreed by all UN member states. It was agreed after the largest consultation ever undertaken by the UN, and there were literally tens of thousands of stakeholders who contributed. And so these goals apply to all countries. I suppose while it was government that made the commitment to these goals, achieving them is going to require support from all members of society, and in particular the business community. Next slide, please. The problem is that after 5 years, the world has not been delivering on progress towards the goals at the pace or scale that is needed. And I've got some, I guess, quite scary stats on the slide there. And we're now seeing the impact of COVID-19 intertwined with some of these long-standing social and economic inequalities. And there was a real missed opportunity that if we'd been working more on this agenda before the pandemic, we would have been better equipped to deal with the pandemic. So we would have had better protections in the informal economy, more universal access to healthcare, more inclusive and sustainable societies, more resilient businesses, and so on. Next slide, please. The good news is that we are seeing a lot of engagement by businesses across the SDGs. But the problem is that there's a critical performance gap between the action that businesses are taking now and the global and societal needs defined by the SDGs. So an example of that, only 39% of companies think that they have targets that are sufficiently ambitious enough or science-based to be able to meet these. So that means, for example, if a business they may be setting targets to reduce their carbon emissions, but those targets aren't actually sufficient enough to be able to limit global temperatures to a safe amount. So that's, I guess, the global picture. Let's go on to the next slide and look a little bit more at the national and the local picture. Specifically in the UK, we have a lot of work to do. And on the left there is a study in 2018 in which it was found that of the 143 targets which are relevant to the UK, we're only making good progress on 24% of those. And the UK government is working on this agenda. So in 2019, the government did a voluntary national review of progress, and they took an in-depth look at each SDG and worked out what our next steps are. And there are some more recent figures on the ONS website of how we're performing against each goal. So now with this mandate from the national government, local governments are working on this too. And London released a report just this year reviewing how London is contributing to the goals. And it also sets out 5 key recommendations for advancing them. And built into those recommendations is this urgent need to use this agenda to help us build back better and to actually recover stronger from the pandemic. And of course, business is going to be such a huge part in London being able to deliver this. So we know that the city needs business to help deliver this, but really what are the benefits to business? Next slide, please. There is a tremendous financial opportunity in aligning with this agenda. There was a study that was done just shortly after the goals were passed, and it found that there was a potential for $12 trillion of new business value every year just by engaging with this agenda. And if we look on the macro level, this is a very pro-business agenda. So better educated and more productive workforce, economic and political stability, more fair and just societies, these things are all good for business, and this is what this agenda seeks to bring about. If we look down at the micro level, Engaging with sustainable development goals and actually helping to deliver them makes a business more attractive, not just for investors, but also for customers who are now starting to demand that organizations and businesses demonstrate purpose beyond profit. Helps you improve management of the supply chain, which could in turn save you money and resources. Improves competitiveness in higher best human capital. And we know that it's proven many times over that the best and the brightest get to choose where they want to work. And what we're hearing now is that they want to work in these kind of organizations that are demonstrating what they're doing to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. Builds trust and accountability. And, of course, actually talking about the Sustainable Development Goals enables you to share this global language so that you can demonstrate to your customers and to your investors and to all of your stakeholders quite what you're doing on the sustainability agenda. And I suppose going back to COVID-19, I mentioned that there was a real missed opportunity in us not making more progress towards the goals, and that would have left us, better prepared for the pandemic if we had have done. And that applies to businesses too. Aligning your strategies with the Sustainable Development Goals is the best way that you can create a resilient, strong, and a sustainable business, and hopefully future-proof against any more shocks or crises that are coming our way. So there are a number of free tools and resources to understand the SDGs better and to understand how you can align with them, communicate them, and explore your own impacts on the goals. And if you're interested, then visit our website, and I can put a link in the chat later. Today, though, we're focusing on just one of the goals, so SDG 13, which is climate action. So yeah, let's take a look at why we're looking at this goal in particular. Well, climate action is one of the SDGs where businesses of any size can have the biggest impact. And I'm not just talking about having the biggest impact on the environment and the society, but also about having the biggest impact on your own business. So it's all about future-proofing your business and being able to reap the benefits for yourself too. So businesses that look to use and manage resources more efficiently can tangibly reduce their operating costs and increase profitability. I've got a note there on the slide about future-proofing your business and getting ahead of the changes. Government is setting targets for the UK to transition to net zero. And so we're seeing lots of changes, not just in regulations and legislation, but also in the way that businesses are going to be able to engage with this. So I guess an example of that, by 2030, you won't be able to buy new petrol and diesel cars and vans in the UK. So that means that if you're looking at replacing your fleet, in the next 9 years, or increasing your fleet, then actually getting ahead of this agenda, making that switch already to zero emission vehicles, means that you're going to be future-proofing your business so that you're not going to be incurring these costs later down the line, and being able to, really take advantage of that. And investors are looking at how you're doing this. So they're looking at how you're going to be able to manage these risks. Risks that are going to occur from disruptions and changes to the supply chain, changes in legislation, and investors particularly looking at how you're going to be able to take advantage of this, but also how you're responding to the shift in demand. And I guess we've already touched a little bit about what we're seeing from the public, but really when it comes to climate, this is really high on the public's agenda. We saw the climate strikes a few years ago. We set a huge pressure in localities and also organisations declaring a climate emergency. And now there's a great expectation that businesses are going to be engaging in this. They are going to be reducing their emissions. And those people, they don't make up your investors, but they also make up your customers and your clients. And so really engaging with this is going to help you attract more customers and gain a competitive advantage. And I suppose this is particularly high on the agenda at the moment because this year the UK will be hosting the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. Next slide, thank you. So that's going to be taking place in Glasgow in November. World leaders are all going to be convening to set ambitious targets for reducing emissions. So the UK will be taking will be looking to take a leading role in these conversations, which means that the government is going to be looking at business to take a leading role in reducing emissions. I suppose I should say that your competitors may already be acting on this. The public is going to be engaged in this. There's already a lot that we're seeing in the media. And so there's expectations for you to be acting on it are ever increasing. But I think by the very act of being here, you've all made that first step, at least in wanting to take some steps in reducing your emissions and engaging with this, and perhaps even leading the way. So I guess that leads on to the big question, what can you do about this? Next slide, please. So I've pulled a screenshot here from the on the left from the government's SME Climate Hub, which is full of resources. And this links to the Race to Zero campaign. And Barney's going to be talking a little bit more about some of the toolkits and all of the different guidance that can help you engage with this. I just wanted to mention as well that the UN Global Compact Network UK is going to be partnering with government to host a 1-hour webinar to take a bit more of a deep dive into COP26 and what it's all about. Explore a little bit more some of those terms that I've mentioned, things like net zero, and also look at some of these practical steps. So I guess my final slide, I just wanted to return to this broader sustainability agenda and take a look at where climate action fits within it. The truth is, we can't achieve any of the other goals that protect the environment or reduce inequalities or lift people out of poverty if we don't take urgent action on the climate. And I've got some animation on the slide, so hopefully, Rowan, if you click it, it will white out a couple of those goals. Brilliant. So the ones that are left, these are the SDGs which business action will have a direct positive impact on just by taking action on SDG 13. So by looking at your supply chain to reduce your emissions, you're impacting Goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. By encouraging your staff to take active transport to work, that's also contributing towards Goal 3, good health and well-being. Looking at renewable energy sources, that's Goal 7. Working with your local council, some of their plans and initiatives contributes towards Goal 11. Offsetting carbon that you can't reduce, that goes towards Goal 15, and so on. And I should say, really, that's just at the direct level. So if you then take into consideration the knock-on impacts globally of your actions on climate action, you can consider how it's actually going to impact all of these goals and help contribute to this entire agenda. So I hope that set the scene a little bit. I'm going to, I think, hand over to Andrew and the rest of our speakers, who are then going to be taking a dive into that practical action and the Race to Zero toolkit that can help you deliver this agenda.
Thank you so much, Jessica. A fantastic overview, and particularly, I think, helpful that emphasis at the end on the interconnectedness between the UN SDGs and how none of them sit in isolation. And if we start with climate change, we're still having lots of other sort of positive impacts. I've also noted down the 17th of June for that webinar for anyone that wants to do a deeper dive into what's happening with COP26, because I think we find every week there is new news seeping out as to what COP26 involves and where it may take us in terms of more progressive policy, perhaps, in this area. Now, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Shilpa Bilimoria of the House of Bilimoria. Shilpa and I met for the first time a few months ago when we were on this sort of Brent seminar series that was mentioned by the Councillor at the start of today's workshop, and we were spotlighting different sectors. And I think Shilpa's story particularly stuck in our minds as being phenomenal, just I suppose in terms of the extent to which a sort of environmentally sound approach really goes to the heart of the House of Bilimoria. So to tell you more, over to Shilpa.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for that intro. It's great to be here today to share my story again. So for everyone, my name is Shilpa Bilimoria, and I'm the founder of House of Bilimoria. I established the label in 2008, and I'm a Brent resident, as well as, operating my whole business and workings from here. Currently, we have a studio in the studio premises that is Second Floor Studios and Arts, which is based in Empire Way in Wembley Park, which is a small, affordable studio space premises for creatives within Brent and the wider community. What I love about working and living in Brent and having all that in one is fostering creative community. shopping local is something that's really important to me. When I founded the business, I was a new mother. I had just had my little girl, so she was under 1 year old. And what was really important is that I could live, I could work, I could have her, going to nursery and all that, and not have to, run all over the place. And I think that in itself as a case study is brilliant for carbon emissions, because there I was not driving around. I was on foot, walking from work to this nursery, coming back home. And just in that kind of small case study, we can see as a local resident and someone who's living and working, having that ethos in my mind innately is sustainable. So with that in mind, when I launched the label, it progressed in that way. So when I launched the label in 2008, it was really important that ethics, number one. I come from a family of tailors. My grandfathers were tailors, and my grandmothers also, and they were the masters in the craft, basically. They were able to raise all of their children in this industry, in the fashion industry. And it was really important to me that the way that the legacy I carried on had to be with fair working conditions. I did hear stories about them having to work, ungodly hours. I got told stories of, you're going into the wrong industry because you're not going to make a living this way. It's not possible, that you're just going to be used, basically. And I was really, really passionate that a craft like this can support our livelihoods, as well as being a labor of love and not being this big engine kind of thing that churns people and product out without any heart. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So with that in mind, founding the label, sustainability was one of the key important things in my mind. So when I launched, there was no other way. And I know that for businesses, there's also going to be a bit of a rewind here. There's going to be, changing your practices and now discovering new resources. Yes, when I started, I went head first into, I want everything ethical. I want everything fair trade. I want everything to have, being able to transparently see the supply chain and where things have come from, and not have people been harmed in the process. Where have the touch points of this been? Now, as a business at that stage in 2008, it was pretty much crippling. There wasn't the resource that there is now out there. I mean, even to the point of Google, the search engine, not being as great. And it was a tall order. And I would say at that stage, diving in with trying to tick every single box that there was pretty much crippling. So we had to rewind very often. And then what happened is deciding what was the key point that was important to me and growing from there. And that happened to be ethics. All of our production is based within the UK, within our studio in Wembley. None of that is shipped abroad. None of that is done in factories. At the moment, we are made to order. So a customer places their order, and that is when we make it. We don't hold high levels of stock, just because A, we don't know if that's going to be purchased, B, that's going to be waste. The fashion industry is one of the biggest contributors to CO2 emissions, about 8%, I think one of the last reports was, and we don't want to be contributing to that. There are so many resources that are already available. And then another really important, passionate thing for me is community. And I think seeing as if we foster our communities and our customers in the realm of community, we're going to bring out those sustainable practices as simply as saying, as working, living, going to nursery, picking up the little one. As soon as we tap into that very human cycle of life and cycle of our days, I think that we can invite a lot of people into this world of sustainability that is sustainable life for me. That's the way it is. So if we move on to the next slide. So our journey, I touched on the fact that at the beginning we wanted everything sustainable, everything had to be really transparent. And it was pretty much crippling then. But what is beautiful to see is our journey along the way. Every collection, every piece of material that we've used, we have kept facets of that since 2008. So I have some materials I have to this day, which was from our first fair trade supplier in Calcutta, that we obtained, and we still have a relationship with that business to this day. To bring it to current days, and that, like, we are still in touch with them. And during the COVID crisis right now, the pandemic, and what we've seen happening in India, I have messaged our supplier there that we have, and I asked them, how can we support you? They're a fair trade company. They work with villages, they work with artisans, and with practices that are all really this handmade, like machine made, really, really traditional form of making and block printing and things. And the answer was, do business with us. There was not make a donation. There was not we need help in this monetary value, but it was, please continue to do business with us. And I think that's a really important example of how we as businesses, regardless of whether it's abroad or with different communities, if we're working together, it is going to help us to survive together and also make these steps towards these SDGs together. So what's beautiful in this journey, all the items that you see here, I could talk you through every single one of them, and we have parts of every single one of them to this day. This hasn't been somewhere where we've churned out kind of garments upon end. Every single piece has a story. So if we move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward all the way to where we are now, post-lockdown. There has been a lot of shape-shifting and changing that's happened. As a business, just as a case study, what we've done is we have niched down to a really, really clear point for our customers. So we can then also build in what's really important is educating our customers about what ethical fashion is, what sustainable fashion is, what upcycling is, because this is what we do. We take vintage, heirloom, and fair trade materials, and we transform them into new items. So what's really important for us is in our messaging and our storytelling that we're bringing our customers on this journey with us. So what you see here is a range of shirts. We've niched down to 6 shirts, which we will retransform in different materials for people that come along and want to join in this journey. And also then a few soft furnishings, which is really digestible, easy for the customers to, grab a hold of, and we can tell that story and get people involved with, playing their part. When you buy an item for us, you're also playing a part with several of those SDGs. And this is something that we want to really bring into our work as we move forward, involving our customers, fostering a community around us, which will be beyond selling our products. We're more purpose over profit with what we do. If we go on to the next slide. So bearing that in mind, we produce items that are created from items mainly that need upcycling with our artisans. We actually have opted not to get them to create brand new pieces for us, brand new production of fabric, but rather said to them they must have had sampling and offcuts and things like that created that no one's taking. So what we're doing is taking those off their hands and saying, well, you don't need to just keep that there stockpiling. We are actually going to relieve you of that and pay you for that. So you are, your livelihoods, your well-being, everything is encapsulated all in one. All of that resource and time and effort and money and water and everything that went into creating those prints doesn't have to be wasted. Alongside this, actually, we've had a company come to us and they were actually going to dispose of, I cannot mention the company for NDA purposes, but they had a huge number of t-shirts that were going to be shredded. So we've got in touch with the company and said we can upcycle those t-shirts. We will put in some beautiful frills and ruffles and create those and lose branding. But otherwise these t-shirts would have been shredded, and that is shredded and perhaps used for something fine. But the fact of the matter is that those t-shirts had so much resource plowed into it already, making them, dyeing them, washing them, producing them with the hands that made them. So all of that resource would then be shredded, which is not sort of, which is a waste at the end of the day. So we're going to be taking those. So there's also a case of connecting with other businesses that do have waste, because one person's waste can be another person's treasure. And that's what we find with our business here. So we're always open to connections and collaborating and passing on materials also that aren't useful to us. We also connect with the local community, we connect with makers, and we share those resources. What we also do is we close the loop. So we have a reincarnation program. So once our items have been purchased by our customers, we also have a card with it that goes along that tells them that once they're done with their item, they're not to dispose of that just however they see fit. They should come back to us and we'll reincarnate that. So we will take that item and transform that into a brand new piece, be it a clutch bag, be it a smaller children's wear item, or simply some like scrunchies or something quite little. So we will upcycle that piece, or we will dispose of it, and have it recycled in a way that is sustainable. So knowing that a lot of these clothes banks and stuff are not operating in ways that are supporting economy in other countries and things, they're actually hindering them. We want to look at that ours is not adding to that. So we're closing that loop by telling the customers, bring your item back, we'll give you 30% off, a voucher for your next item, and we will take care of that item. So if we move on to the next slide. Again, with the customer journey. So bringing that along, several touch points along the way. Before, the way we market, we tell people about our story. We're very much a storytelling brand and business, as well as once the customer receives their item. We spoke a little bit about digital, and at this micro level, things that we can do to be, be in with sort of the time of this digital manner and stuff. There are very simple things that we can do as a business. All of our packaging is biodegradable and recycle tissue paper and that you can recycle again. We also have a QR code on our clothing label. So as you see, if you all look inside your clothes, you're going to have a tag that has wash care labels and things on it. Recently, I've had a customer come back, and this is about the journey, and there was a customer that was washing her items in such a unsustainable manner for that garment that it deteriorated the garment a lot quicker than what we would have imagined. And I have that garment back with me now because it's back to be upcycled. But what it was is we could advise about washing, what types of wash to put in, and once a customer just scans that QR code, it's going to take you right to our website, and which then gives you the aftercare details about that and also leads you to that. So that's another way to stay involved with that customer, that once that product is in their hands, that we're not out of the picture, that we're very much still in the picture, and we want to continue that journey with our customer and close that loop, bring that background. So therefore we are not creating this waste and contributing to the waste that this fashion industry makes. So if we move forward, that is my presentation. If you have any questions, I think I could go on much more. I'm really passionate about this topic, so I hope that has come through. And yes, do find me on Twitter, on Instagram and things. I'm very happy to connect.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Shilpa. I mean, the necessary attention to detail at every sort of stage of your sort of production and sort of customer journey is wonderful to sort of revisit with you today. And I have to say, since we last spoke, I've brought my first pair of shorts from the company Surplus, which applies the same sort of principle, taking offcuts to make their garments. So you're starting to change my wardrobe, and I'm hoping I'll have one of your garments very soon. Now I'm hoping you can stay with us for questions at the end, because we're now going to turn to my colleague Barney Close of West London Business, who's going to take us through the Race to Zero West London campaign and the supporting toolkit. So over to you, Barney.
Thank you, Andrew, and great to hear from our speakers and really the messages of kind of the interconnectedness of this agenda. And I think there's clear support, as we can see, for green recovery on an international, national, and also a local level, but a long way to go to reach the ambitious goals that we want to achieve. So the stakes really are high, which is why we talk about the race to zero. The race to zero, the objective of it is to build momentum around the shift to a decarbonised economy ahead of COP26, where governments must strengthen their contribution to the Paris Agreement. We know that delivering this promise is going to require a whole economy transition. And at West London Business, if you could moving on to the next slide, we work with the business community, academia, incubators and accelerators, think tanks and not-for-profits, as well as governments and public bodies to strengthen the West London supply chain, with the aim of making it sustainable and climate resilient as possible, which leads to all the knock-on impacts that Jessica and Councillor Stevens have detailed. So here's a sort of snapshot of some of our programs. We deliver on this agenda by focusing on innovation in clean tech and helping sustainable organisations grow and flourish through our Better Futures programme, which I'll touch upon in more detail later. We link people together to support innovation in the aviation industry through our London West Innovation District. And the genesis of the Innovation District came from our Blue Sky conference, which is we see as the Silicon Valley of aviation, back in November. And really, this is to make and help other aviation hubs reach their net zero targets. We've recently launched our Better Futures Plus programme to help businesses pledging to reach net zero by 2030 develop their sustainability strategy. And through all of this practical action, we're really trying to develop case studies to inspire others to act and move forward with this agenda. So moving on, achieving net zero is really being recognised as a primary goal of climate change mitigation, like I say, at a global level. In 2019, the UK became the first major economy to legislate and commit to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And this will really inform the future direction of government policy over the coming decades and a major implication for businesses. So setting challenging sustainability targets can seem daunting and even risky for many businesses, but it can bring significant commercial benefits, as Jessica detailed, and future-proof your business, not to mention demonstrating social responsibility, which will be vital for the long-term durability and also future financing of your organization. Our sustainability tools guide will provide you with the tools to get started on your journey as part of our Race to Zero page, which you can see here. And it will provide you with information on wider policy guidelines, sector-specific tools so you can track and reduce your emissions to fit your business and stakeholder needs. To get started, you can look at the UN Global Compact's free 30-minute workshop on setting science-based targets. And then really it's about providing the tools to create this practical action. So our sustainability tools guide will get you started on the journey, and it's really a resource designed to signpost tools to support you in measuring in the first instance and then reducing your carbon footprint. The guide includes some tools that really provide a more holistic view of environmental sustainability, as well as tools that incorporate social economic value creation. There's a focus on the built environment. The operations of buildings alone represents about 40% of energy use in many developed economies. Reducing energy use and transitioning towards zero greenhouse emissions in the built environment is going to be critical to sustain the Earth's ecosystems. You can also conduct a product lifecycle analysis. So these tools can assist with sustainability decision-making from a product and/or project level. And these are really suitable for businesses to understand the sustainability performance and impacts, and also discover hotspots in this process and help stakeholders making better informed decisions. If you want to take an even deeper dive into your sustainability and environmental footprint, we have a sustainability consultancies directory, which offers a range of sustainability consultants, which have been carefully selected by us And these are across a variety of sectors and can really get you on the green business transformation. Next slide, please. So at the Race to Zero launch, there was an interesting report that showed that over half of the global GDP measured in terms of actors who make up the global GDP have committed to or are thinking about setting a net zero target. Here we have our West London Race to Zero map, which shows the businesses who have set these targets within our geographical footprint. So there's two sides to getting your net zero targets and making these targets. Corporates can register with the SBTIs, where over 1,000 businesses around the world are working with the SBTIs to reduce their emissions in line with the climate science. And then there's the SME climate commitment, which you can see as the blue pins within the map. So SMEs really are the lifeblood of our economy, and especially in Brent, as Councillor Stevens touched upon, the amount of micro and small businesses that really help Brent thrive, and to set these targets for these small businesses, the SME Climate Hub, along with the national government, have set is encouraging all SMEs to make the following commitments by completing a short form. You can halve your greenhouse gas emissions before 2030, achieve net zero emissions before 2050, and disclose your progress on a yearly basis. Along the way, you will unlock incentives and benefits that will make the journey well worth it. And we're here to help with this. And as touched on before, and as Jessica spoke about briefly in her presentation, the tools really are there for you to take these steps. The movement's gathering extraordinary momentum, and here at West London Business, we're working with our partners to inspire business ambition and reach the global goals, enable practical action, and shape a responsible business environment across our sub-region, and working towards a London-wide agenda as well. Next slide, please. So, touching on in more detail one of our other schemes, the Better Futures programme, which we deliver with our partners Imperial College, Imperial Consultants, the GLA, and Sustainable Ventures. And this is really to make London a beacon of clean tech businesses who are striving to lead the way in innovation for London. As Councillor touched on and Shilpa has demonstrated within these case studies, within her business and the work that she's doing, these businesses and case studies are going to be crucial to advancing the green agenda. Within Brent, Magway is to give you a flavour of some of the Better Futures companies who have really helped from our support. Magway is a sustainable transport solution moving goods through small pipes, aiming to address the explosive growth in online shopping. It provides Hyperloop technology using electromagnetic motor systems for underground e-commerce, and is a real showcase of the innovation that is going on within the borough of Brent. We encourage you to explore our Better Futures directory to discover more of these fantastic clean tech businesses, which can help you on a personal and business level to become more sustainable. Next slide, please. Building on the success of the Better Futures programme, we're in the middle of launching our Better Futures Plus programme, which is designed to help 12 businesses in London understand the environmental impacts and design a strategy to reach net zero by 2030. We're working with 12 businesses across 4 sectors of film, creative, food and hospitality, and each business has been provided with £5,000 worth of green innovation vouchers to gain bespoke sustainability advice, and also taking part in the Leonardo Centre's Executive Leadership Programme delivered through the Imperial Business School. And we're seeing, again, some absolutely fantastic case studies of companies who really want to make that transition to net zero, but maybe don't have the tools or resources to do so. And to support businesses like these that really are the lifeblood of our economy, is extremely rewarding, and will pave the way for other businesses within their sector to make similar steps. As part of this, all the 12 companies are using our Climate Essentials tool, which is which will allow you to get an understanding of your carbon footprint on scopes 1, 2, and 3. And I think is a good time for me to hand over to Martina, who will talk you through the tool and how your business can really start your journey by making this first step.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barney, for the introduction. My name is Martina Coleman, and I work for Climex Community as a climate change engineer. Climex Community is a young, small organization. We started operation nearly 1.5 years ago, and we are a very mission-driven company. Usually, we hear about the conversation who is responsible to tackle global warming. And at Climex Community, we actually believe everyone can do their part to fight climate change. That is why we have developed a carbon management tool, which is holistic in nature and can help different stakeholders measure, track, and reduce their carbon emissions. This tool is helpful for people and households that want to measure their carbon footprint. It is also very useful for small and medium enterprises that they may not have a lot of resources, time, and knowledge to embark on that carbon reduction journey. And it's also helpful for local authorities, trade associations that they need to get information about their ecosystem, what they are doing and what they are struggling to reduce emissions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to provide a small demo on how our Climate Essential tool is helpful for small and medium enterprises that want to embark on that carbon reduction journey. So let me just share my screen with you. Our tool is called Climate Essentials. And we can select different profiles according to your preferences. In this case, I'm going to go to the business side. And Climate Essentials try to make it easy and engaging for a business to embark on that carbon reduction journey. Okay, let me just... obviously, we know that carbon accounting is quite a complex task. So we are trying to make the process very seamlessly and very easy to engage. We obviously going to ask you a few questions to establish a business profile for you, and that is going to help us tailor the questions that we're going to ask you to calculate your carbon emissions. Across the carbon calculations, you're going to see the estimation button, because obviously some of this information may not be readily available in your business. So with Climate Essential, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to calculate your emissions. And you are going to select the years for which you want to calculate your carbon footprint as well, and the sector as well. We have divided the carbon calculations into 4 different sectors. The first one is energy, because we believe energy is one of the largest contributors when it comes to carbon emissions. Here we're going to ask you about information about your electricity bills and your gas bill. Obviously, this is going to be in pounds or kilowatt hours. Again, this information might not be easy for you to find in your business operations. So again, we are going to provide an estimation button this is going to be based on your business profile. Similarly, we're going to ask you if you get your electricity from a renewable energy provider, or if you generate your own electricity on site by solar panels or wind. And this is the same for gas if you have a green gas provider. We also ask you about some other type of fuels that you may use in your business operations, for example, heating oil or diesel. And then we're going to move to the transport. Again, this is very easy to complete. If you have the mileage for your passenger vehicles or delivery vehicles you use in your business, you can type in here. And Climate Essentials is going to automatically calculate the carbon emissions from transport. Another type of emissions that we need to take into account with your business, these are indirect emissions. Obviously, you are not responsible for them, but they are a huge source of energy, and maybe not this year in 2020, 2021, but in normal operations, you're going to have employee flights or business flights, and you're going to have employee commuting. And depending on the numbers of employees you have, this is going to be a huge source of emissions. And here in the sliders, you can actually very easily calculate or estimate the indirect transport emissions from employee commuting. The second to last sector that we focus on climate essentials is products and services. And again, we ask you about your water usage in pounds or cubic meters. And if you don't have the information, we can always estimate them for you. We also have a section to estimate the carbon emissions that are coming from employees' food and drinks, and the type of food that you provide for your employees. For example, if it's vegan, then the carbon emissions are going to be significantly lower. And then we have emissions that are coming from different products that you may buy for your business, for example, electronics, stationery, and furniture. Then we have home working emissions, because we realized that because of the pandemic, some of the, or most of the carbon emissions that were coming from your business, offices, or premises were moved to the employees' houses. So if you select here the business profile for your home working emissions, the numbers of hours a day your employees work from home, the numbers of employees you have working from home, and how often they work from home, based on this profile, we can easily estimate the office equipment emissions. These are the emissions that are coming from laptops, printers, and routers. Then we have hidden emissions, and then cooling emissions, if this is relevant for your employees. And then we also have the option to add a bit more details into your indirect emissions. And if you click on this button, you're going to be able to access a screen where you can estimate the carbon emissions that are coming from services for your business, for example, accounting, legal service, marketing, pension services, etc. And then the last section that we need to focus when we calculate scope 3 or indirect emissions that are coming from your business is waste. In this case, we have choose to divide the waste into three different sectors, which is general waste, recyclables, and then food waste if your council collects the food waste separately. Again, we provide the options to estimate the food waste or all the waste for you, because we know it's quite difficult to get the kilos or the tons of waste that it's produced in your business. Or if you want to add a bit more accuracy, you can actually go into our waste calculator, where you can simply just select the type of bins that you have in the business and how often you empty it on an average week. Once you have gone through the entire carbon calculations, you are going to be able to access our dashboard, where we provide you the carbon footprint for your business for the selected period of time. We actually also benchmark the carbon emissions that are coming from your business with businesses that are working in the similar sector of you and are of the similar size. Then we divide your carbon emissions into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And this is extremely important if you're planning on starting to reporting your carbon emissions against the GHG protocol. Scope 1 emissions are coming from your fuel usage, gas, diesel, and your vehicles. Scope 2 are the emissions that are coming from electricity and electric vehicles. And scope 3 are emissions that are indirect of your business that happen upstream and downstream of your business. This is waste, and this is also supply chain. We also divide the emissions into different sectors according to our carbon calculations. And we also have how much you can have pledged to reduce, and I'm going to go this in a second, and how much our community, all the businesses in our community, have pledged to reduce. Because as Shilpa said, the sense of community is quite important when you are embarking on that carbon reduction journey. You need to feel the sense that you are not the only one doing something. And we know that every little thing helps when it comes to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. On climate essentials, you're going to be able to access your reduction plan, which is tailored to your profile. Some of these options, you may have done this already for your business, or you may have switched your conventional lighting to LED, or maybe you have electrified your passenger fleet already. So if you click on this, then these options are not going to appear later on your carbon reduction plan. Once you access your carbon reduction plan, you're going to see your carbon emission breakdown and how much you have pledged to reduce already. So for example, if we go to energy reductions, you're going to see a few options on how you can start reducing the carbon emissions that are coming from electricity, gas, and fuel consumption. So for example, what happens if you install an efficient boiler, or if you keep your office temperature below 18 or 19 degrees, then you're going to see the carbon emissions are going to start going down substantially. This is for energy, but we also have a few recommendations for transport, your suppliers, and also waste. And here you can see your own carbon footprint and how that carbon footprint has progressed once you have pledged to reduce these carbon emissions. Obviously, we would be delighted that every business can join us on Climate Essentials. And if you have any recommendations on how we can improve our platform, or if you want to schedule a demo for us, please do so. And I'm going to put my email here. You can contact me at contact@Climex Community, or you can also email me directly, Martina@Climex Community. And I'm going to write my email now on the chat. Thank you so much, West London Business, for helping us help businesses in the Better Future Plus program.
Martina, thank you so much for that that overview of the Climate Essentials tool. I'm looking forward to giving it a try on our own carbon footprint at West London Business. When we last did the calculation using a different tool earlier in the year, it came to about 170 tonnes per annum pre-COVID, which we're now sort of busy trying to figure out how we chip away at. Now, I think we've got about 15 minutes for questions to our panel. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat window for any questions that delegates want to ask, and indeed panel members may want to put questions to each other. So do use the raise hand tool underneath the participants list if you want to. But I'm just going to kick things off with a question for I think back to you, Martina, and this is around how long it might take a business to sort of go through using your tool to sort of get an initial sense of their footprint. What's realistic?
Yeah. No, that's completely fine. I think obviously it depends on where their businesses are in terms of their carbon journey, and it also depends on how they collect the information, the financial information, on a yearly basis. But with the businesses in the pilot that we have so far, there are businesses that have completed in less than a few hours, and there are some businesses that need a bit more help when it comes to collecting all the information and getting things ready to go through the carbon calculations. So obviously it's going to range, but it can go from a few hours to maybe 2 or 3 days. The good thing is obviously you don't need to complete it all in one take. You can complete it by sections, and you can come back later when you have all the information, and that can be amended whenever you want to.
So it doesn't have to be too burdensome just to get started, but you've got the options then to dive into the detail. And do I remember rightly that obviously whilst that you're going to be charging businesses a sort of nominal amount, or maybe having local authorities and other partners sort of sponsoring the tool in due course, at the moment, if a business would like to give it a try, they should get in touch with you, and for a few months at least they can probably give it a try for free.
Yes, because what we want is to embark as many businesses as we want on that carbon reduction journey, and we think obviously they have all other priorities. So as long as we can help them, they will always be welcome to access our platform for free, and we can have that for a few months, and they can always give us feedback on how we can improve our carbon emissions and carbon calculations.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to hopefully be able to bring Shilpa back in. We obviously got a very broad sense from you, Shilpa, of all the different fronts that you've been tackling since you were sort of founded. I think it was back in 2008. Clearly this year particularly, but it does feel like it's probably a trend for the next decade. There's now a massive focus on carbon emissions. What's your sort of take from what you've heard this morning? Have you tried using one of these calculators before? Are you tempted to see just how low your carbon footprint is?
I literally have just noted down Martina's email to see if we're going to fill one of those in. I had a audit done years ago, actually. I had it done, I think it would have been 2009 or 2010. And I was only working in my home-based studio back then. And I had someone come and audit, and it was a very small audit because it was just me and my machine there. And there were little tips like actually leave the machine running while in between working, because the power surge that would have taken to switch on the industrial machine would have actually meant that I'm using more power. So there were simple tips back then that I had at that small scale, but since then I haven't used one of these calculators. And just sitting through this, I've been scribbling notes as to like where we need to tap into. So actually I'm looking forward to Martina getting in touch with you and using the tool to see where we are now. We actually use the Royal Mail for, shipping a lot of our things. But just lately I've discovered a new company called Hive in London, and they are on bike. So we're going to look at looking at collaborating with this company, perhaps opening an account there to see if a lot of our London deliveries can then be done, with Hive actually. So it's all about those connections for us. And we are now moving into more of this online space, looking at the fact that we're going to be shipping a lot more. Whereas originally we'd have customers coming in face to face, which is obviously that the face of Jack absolutely changed. And we tried really, really hard to actually keep that model running. But it just seems that at the moment with people's anxieties and even for the safety of our own workplace, we want to kind of minimize those risks.
Fantastic. Well, we'll watch keenly to sort of find out what you discover using the tool. I suppose once we gone through the process of using a similar tool, as I said, we discovered we had 170 tons of emissions each year, largely in scope 3, so our sort of supply chain through running events and occasionally getting on an aeroplane. Now, I suppose what we've had to start looking at is carbon offsets, certainly as a kind of bridge towards the future and chipping away further at those emissions. It can be a difficult choice for small businesses and indeed large businesses figuring out what carbon offsets to buy. And I'm just wondering, Martina, whether you've got sort of thoughts to share on what factors should be considered on the carbon offset front.
Yes, of course. Obviously, carbon offset is a great way in which you can lower the emissions that you cannot reduce somehow, you cannot avoid, you can reduce. So you can buy carbon offsets. And there are a few platforms that offer carbon offset for you. Obviously, there are a huge range. They can go from buying or supporting renewable energy. You can buy some trees in different locations. Obviously, that is going to affect the price. And it's going to affect the effectivity or the long-term storage of the carbon emissions. So you need to take into account that when you buy a carbon offset, that needs to be verified by a standard, usually the gold standards. They need to make sure that the project that you support, they are actually helping actively to reduce the carbon emissions. And they need to make sure that those emissions are not going to come back to the atmosphere in a few years' time. So once you have made sure that the carbon emissions are verifiable and they are not transferable, then you can select a huge range of options, the projects, depending on obviously your interest. You may have renewable energy, reforestation, supporting in Africa, clean stoves for women. And obviously that is going to depend on your business profile or your attention or the project that you want to buy. And also you need to take into account the price. There's on the voluntary market, and there is not a concern, but you need to take into account the price volatility when it comes to buying carbon offsets. There are carbon offsets that go as cheap as £3 a ton, and you have carbon offsets that are a bit more expensive, £10 and £15 a ton. Obviously, it depends if you want to go by price or if you want to go by projects. There are some interesting projects that are going across the globe when you want to buy carbon offsets, but maybe also you can go by region. I know that Andrew, you have bought carbon offsets in the UK, but you can also support projects in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia.
Thank you. A splendid overview, as always, Martina, of the sort of carbon offset sort of market. I've just shared, in fact, in the chat window, the sort of forest carbon sort of platform and club that we purchase our offsets through, which, as you say, is sort of investing in sort of UK woodlands, and therefore, if we wanted to go and visit them, we could go and see where the money is being invested. I'm going to come back to Councillor Stevens in just a moment, perhaps to share some of your reflections on the conversation this morning. But before that, I just want to turn to my colleague Barney, once again, for you to unpack SBTI for us. You mentioned SBTI a few times. What does it stand for, and why should it matter?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so SBTIs is the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and we are that really is in sort of December 2015, 195 countries signed the Paris Agreement to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, and the SBTIs is really the science behind that. So how do companies first set out their stall by saying they're going to commit to going to net zero, but also aligning to the science. So it's a collaboration between the World Resource Institute, the WWF, and the UN Global Compact. And I'm sure Jessica can maybe fill in where I might have missed some details, but it uses kind of rigorous criteria to ensure targets are aligned with the latest climate science that is coming through from those organizations.
Fantastic, thank you, Barney. So companies wanting to sort of get the most robust plan in place for reducing emissions is a sort of science-based approach they should be considering. And Jessica, I recollect a lot of the workshops that can be accessed online through UN Global Compact Network UK are picking up on this sort of science-based target approach. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, yeah, not too much to add from what Barney said, actually, but it can seem quite complex. So we've been delivering some workshops to help you navigate through that. And we've got some more coming up, and we've got some recordings that you can watch of some of the ones that we did last autumn. So they're all online and free to watch for anybody that's looking to dip their toes into that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. Well, finally, I think we'll go full circle back to Councillor Stevens for your reflections on what you've heard and what we've all got to do next.
Yeah, thank you. Honestly, really, really interesting, really great to hear from such a diverse group of people. I really appreciate it. My very quick reflections really were just, I think it's very clear from what I've heard that everything that we do as a borough and everything that we do as a society comes back to the climate emergency and is connected to that. And it's very difficult to tackle, global poverty and inequality without also tackling the climate emergency, because those things reinforce each other. We see that at a global level, but I think we also see that at a borough level as well. The people worst affected by this are often the most disadvantaged, and often the ones who are doing the least to impact the environment as well. And all of that comes together. And I think that the second kind of observation I had was just that it makes economic and business sense as well as moral sense to actually and invest and to support the low carbon circular economy and really reduce our emissions contributions. I spoke earlier about the cycle of low pay and poor quality work, which a lot of Brent residents face. Investing in low carbon technology is absolutely critical to stopping that cycle and actually reducing the impact of the pandemic as well, because those very same residents are often the ones who have been worst affected by COVID. The final observation I just wanted to stress was I think I was just incredibly impressed by how much is on offer and all the different tools that are out there. And all the absolutely brilliant things that are available for businesses to use from all of you. And I think there's a lot of great ideas here and a lot of brilliant energy, and that's just absolutely amazing to see. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd agree. A great way to start the day. And as you say, with all the tools that are there now, we really have no excuse but to crack on with it. And I think you also mentioned in your opening remarks, of course, that Brent as a borough is now applying sustainability principles to your procurement. So actually, in terms of the incentive for those that want to get into the council supply chain, making these moves is now going to be critical. I think all that is left for me to say as we hit the top of the hour is a huge thank you to everyone for your contribution today. This is, as I said, our second stop, and we've got several more boroughs to visit over the next few days across northwest London. If you want to access the toolkit that Barney introduced and get easy access through there to the UN Global Compact resources and the Climate Essentials tool, go to westlondon.com/race to zero. And of course, feel free to email barney.close@westlondon.com with any queries. Have a great rest of your days.